Have you ever stood before a place that once belonged to you, only to watch it sold off to those who know nothing but power and money? Have you ever been mocked, belittled, erased from the very history you helped to build? I have lived through all of it, and I stood back up, not to seek revenge through anger, but to reclaim honor through patience, truth, and a shot no one saw coming. This is not just a story about a shooting range. This is a story about memory, honor, and how an ordinary person can overturn an entire empire built on lies. If you believe there are things in life that cannot be bought or erased, then this story is for you. Blood spread across the polished stone floor of the Moonridge Elite Club. Not human blood, but the blood of strangled arrogance. I knelt down, the gun still smoking in my hand, my gaze cold as steel as I looked up at the $1 million portrait hanging at the center of the hall, where my final bullet had pierced through every face in the Malloran family portrait, leaving only one face intact. Mine. 24 hours. Earlier they had laughed in my face, called me a wannabe auntie, a nobody who dared walk into their kingdom with a cheap promotional voucher. 24 hours earlier, I stood there, the perfect excuse for them to show off their superiority. And now, I was the reason the entire room had gone dead silent. Remember that first afternoon I walked into this place very clearly. The late afternoon sun slanted through the glass roof, stretching my shadow across the expensive tiles as if to remind me I didn't belong here. Moonridge Elite Club, where the rich were praised for their marksmanship without ever needing to aim properly. A secret society of power, money, and polished appearances. I walked in holding a free shooting voucher that my daughter, Grace, had found at a community event. "Give it a shot, Mom," she said. "No one knows who you are, and that's a good thing." I approached the reception desk, where a young man with gelled hair looked me over from head to toe, his lips curling slightly as if he smelled something odd. "I have a trial voucher." "Signing up for a shooting session," I said, my voice calm, but clear. He looked at the crumpled paper in my hand, then looked at me. Worn cardigan, neatly tied hair, and scuffed shoes. A reluctant nod. "Lane 14. Basic equipment. Session ends at 5 p.m. No lingering." He slid a guest card across the counter. No further words. Down at the far end, a group was gathering as if at a cocktail party, minus the alcohol. Standing among them was Clarissa Malloran, club president, heiress to the vast Malloran Pharmaceuticals fortune, and a self-declared icon of modern shooting class, perfectly highlighted blonde hair, tailored outfit down to the last millimeter, the smile of someone who had never heard the word no in her life. The moment she spotted me, she shot a laser-sharp glance that cut right through my cardigan. "Oh, look," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Seems the club's trying out a community outreach program today?" The crowd chuckled. A silver-haired man, Terry Lockwood, the club's CEO, just chuckled awkwardly. Everyone knew Clarissa was someone you didn't cross. Clarissa walked toward me, her voice sweet as syrup but sharp as a razor. "Still struggling with the gun, darling? Or did you think this was a yoga class?" I looked at her, still feeling out the safety mechanism of the rental gun. "Just getting familiar," I replied. "Oh, how adorable," she laughed. "But this sport requires finesse, reflexes, and frankly, the right background." I stood still. No reaction. No retreat. I had heard words like that my entire life. "You know, what?" Clarissa snatched my gun. "Let me show you what a proper shot looks like." She raised the gun, adjusted her stance, and bang, bang, bang. 3 shots. 3 perfect bullseyes. The whole hall applauded. Someone even whistled. Clarissa smiled, handing the gun back to me as if tossing a stick to a dog. "Now then, if you don't mind, we like to keep the atmosphere here clean, free of the stench of failure." I stayed silent. I bowed my head. I holstered the gun, buttoned up my bag, and as I turned away, my small leather wallet fell to the floor, scattering a few papers. No one noticed. No one cared. They were too busy laughing. No one saw the card that fell out, flipping face up. Printed on it, though the ink had begun to fade, Colonel Alexandra Duskwood, retired, United States. Special Forces Tier 1, Sniper Certification. Level S. I walked out of Moonridge Elite Club with a heavy gait, as if carrying the weight of the world on my back. But that was just the surface. Beneath the baggy cardigan, beneath the seemingly trembling steps, was absolute clarity. I had completed the first phase of infiltration, and as expected, they laughed loudly, mocked me, laughed as if this world belonged only to them and their kind. Good, better than expected. My apartment was just a 20-minute drive away, a tiny 2-bedroom flat tucked into the working class, east side of the city. No one in that neighborhood knew what I had once done. They only knew me as Alexandra Duskwood, a part-time accountant living quietly, tending to her plants in the afternoons. They didn't know I had served 22 years in the military, didn't know I had marched through lands whose very names sent shivers down young soldiers' spines. Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, names forever tied to dust, blood, and split-second life-or-death decisions. I locked the door behind me and headed straight to the living room, where every trace of my past had been carefully hidden. In the corner of the room stood an old wooden desk. Underneath, a hidden locked drawer. I knelt down, pulling out the small key I always wore around my neck, a habit formed from the days of guarding classified information. The lock clicked open with a soft snap. I pulled the drawer out. Inside was a worn leather box. I placed the box on the table and opened the lid. Inside were no bundles of cash, no property deeds, only the past. I carefully took out each item, 2 silver stars, awarded for extraordinary gallantry in combat, 1 bronze star with a V device for exceptional bravery under fire, 3 purple hearts, proof of the times I bled for my country, dozens of medals, certificates for discipline, skill, and loyalty. Beside them lay an American flag, folded perfectly into a triangle, and beneath it a photograph. Me and Thomas, still in uniform, hand in hand, eyes full of hope. Thomas Duskwood, my husband, a warrior, a hero, and the reason why I could not, and would never, allow them to desecrate this land. The place where Moonridge Elite Club now flaunted its lavish shooting range. Once was Fort Westwood, the military base where Thomas and I had spent the happiest days of our lives. When we married in a small ceremony, guests clad in uniform, where we said our tearful goodbyes before each deployment, never knowing if we'd see each other again. And the same place, where, after Thomas fell during a rescue mission, I scattered his ashes beneath the memorial garden, a small peaceful patch filled with cherry trees. Fort Westwood was later decommissioned, but under one condition: the land was to remain a military memorial. Federal law, a moral promise, the honor of a nation. Yet through scheming, under-the-table deals, Moonridge Elite was built, on the ashes of those this country had sworn never to forget. I carefully packed the mementos back into the box, my fingers brushed lightly against Thomas's military ID card. The letters faded with time. Majay, Thomas Duskwood. 7th, Special Operations Group. For those who cannot speak for themselves. For those who cannot speak for themselves. I clenched my fists. The people at Moonridge thought today was just another afternoon to mock a nobody. They had no idea they had stirred something they could neither comprehend nor defeat. On the table, my laptop blinked with a new message notification. I opened it. It was from Grace, my daughter, now in her final year of law school. Grace. Recon complete? Target assessed? I smiled. Me. Target assessed. complacent and blind, Phase 2 approved. A quick reply, needing no further explanation. We had been planning this for months. Every step, every move is meticulously calculated. The next phase would no longer be about endurance. It would be about action. I stood up, straightening my cardigan, adjusting my stance. There was no tremor left in my steps. I had once waited patiently in the darkness for hours just to pull the trigger once, and this time I would do the same. Only now, the targets weren't enemies on the battlefield. They were the traitors, too. This nation's honor. I am not the kind of person who acts without evidence. Back in the military, every bullet I fired came with confirmation, coordinates, and consequences. This time was no different. Only instead of a scope, I used a hidden camera. Instead of tracking mobile targets, I was following men in suits and ties. The next morning, I returned to Moonridge Elite. This time, there were no sneers, no scrutinizing glances. I didn't need their attention. I only needed their negligence. And that, they delivered perfectly. Those accustomed to standing above others never bothered to look sideways or down. I registered again under the name Alexandra Woods. Once again, I selected the amateur category. "Still chasing the dream, ma'am?" the receptionist asked with a half smirk. I smiled lightly. "I'm the kind who learns from failure." Not a lie. Between shooting rounds, I quietly moved through the corridors, committing the layout to memory. Found the office of Terry Lockwood, the club's CEO. The door was unlocked. They could spend millions on marble floors but forget a basic double-lock system. I slipped inside. Fast, silent. On the desk, expansion blueprints for the shooting range. Signatories, Mayor Paul Granger. And beneath that, Clarissa Malloran. I photographed every page, every line, every ink mark. Then I opened a drawer, where I found what they thought had been buried forever. An old file folder, a faded stamp across the top, Fort Westwood Redevelopment, Project, Special Planning Committee. Inside was a copy of the original 2008 resolution, declaring the land must be preserved as a permanent military memorial park, and right after that, a 2020 amended file coldly stating, "No longer recognized as a historical site. No reason given. No meeting minutes attached. Just a single silent line erasing an entire chapter of history." Attached was an internal email. "Ensure original records are removed from the city system. Coordinate with Parker and Malloran to bring the plan to City Council next month." They had fabricated history, erased an entire memorial site to build a VIP lounge and parking lot. I slipped out of the office like a shadow. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from rage. I had once seen comrades fall in battle, and the only thing they ever asked was, "Don't let us be forgotten." And now, those promises, sold for a few signatures and a glass of chilled champagne. That afternoon, I called Grace. She was currently interning at the federal attorney's office. Her voice came through the speaker. "I'm here, Mom." "I have the files," I said. A pause. Then, she spoke slowly. "So, it's time to move?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Clarissa and the mayor committed fraud, violated federal preservation laws. They altered protected land status. This could lead to criminal charges. Grace said nothing more, but I knew she had switched into combat mode. That evening, I sat alone at my desk. The soft yellow light of the lamp illuminated every scanned document. Beside it was Thomas's photo, his smile still alive in the frame. I whispered, "You once said, 'Don't let them erase me.' I promised, remember? It's time to keep that promise." I knew the hardest part was yet to come. They still didn't know who I was. They hadn't seen me truly shoot, hadn't realized I wasn't some failed accountant. But they were about to find out, because next week was the Moonridge Elite's most prestigious shooting competition. where the mayor would formally announce the expansion, built over my husband's memorial, and I had signed up, not to win, but to expose the truth, right in the heart of their untouchable sanctuary. They stole our land. They trampled on my comrades' memories. They laughed in my face. Now it was my turn to raise my weapon and start the countdown. The sky that day was crystal clear, not a single cloud. The kind of sky people often describe as perfect for launching a major event. And for those gathering at Moonridge Elite, it truly was. Flags flying high, golden nameplates gleaming, champagne poured into crystal glasses. An event parading as a sports shooting competition. But in truth, it was a political stage show. And right at the center of the storm was me, a middle-aged woman in an old cardigan, quietly signing my name onto the registration board. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Which division are you registering for?" the receptionist asked, her gaze sliding over me as if debating whether I was lost. I smiled calmly and pointed at the novice box. "Wherever is appropriate, that's where I'll start." She blinked for a moment, then nodded, and handed me badge number 19, marked with an orange stripe, the color for outsiders. The competition unfolded through preliminary rounds. I stuck to my role, shooting well enough to stay in, but hesitant enough not to draw attention. It was a delicate dance between competence and mediocrity. I had once held my breath for 3 minutes in the freezing forests of Bosnia to avoid detection. Maintaining a slight tremor in my hands while pulling the trigger was child's play compared to that. Between rounds, I quietly drifted through the administrative area. No one noticed. No one suspected. A few internal documents carelessly left on the director's desk. I flipped them open and snapped photos with the micro camera hidden in my shirt button. Blueprints for the range expansion, extending right across what once was the Fort Westwood Memorial Site. Internal emails about reclassifying the land, category and financial commitments from Clarissa to Mayor Granger. One email even read, "Make sure no one digs up old issues. Too late, Clarissa. Far too late." By afternoon, the finalist list was announced. One name stirred a ripple through the crowd. Alexandra Woods, Novice Division. I heard the whispers. How did she even make it through? Just lucky, probably a PR stunt. And then I spotted Clarissa, standing amidst a group, including Mayor Granger himself. She was presenting the expansion plans for the VIP zone like she was about to cut a ribbon right then and there. When my name was announced, Clarissa's face froze for a split second, just long enough for me to catch a flicker of unease in her eyes. Then it vanished, replaced by the smug smile of someone who thought she could never lose. She strode straight toward me, flashing that half smirk as if handing down benevolence. "Well, look who's still here." Her voice is as sweet as syrup to strangers, but to me, every word sliced like a blade. "Didn't expect you to be suited for precision sports." I turned, meeting her gaze squarely. "Not everyone is lucky enough to attend fancy shooting schools," I said, voice steady as clockwork. "But some of us learned on real battlefields." This time she didn't smile. Clarissa stepped onto the main stage to address the crowd before the finals. "Dear guests, today is not just a celebration of skill and tradition, but the beginning of a new chapter for Moonridge Elite. Tomorrow, with the support of the City Council, we will break ground on the expansion to become the nation's premier luxury shooting facility." Applause thundered through the venue, but I could see a few veterans in the stands stiffening, realizing what land this expansion was desecrating. Clarissa bowed, then turned back to me, leaning in just enough to hiss, "Ready for a public failure?" I answered quietly, just enough for her to hear. I never aim at the same target twice. And then the loudspeaker blared. The final match had begun. Clarissa went first. Her shooting stance was picture perfect, each shot hitting the inner circles. A performance, not a competition. The audience clapped exactly as expected, a queen reigning in a world built solely to worship her. Then it was my turn. I stepped up, shouldered the rifle, and checked the sights. No wasted motion, no trembling hands, no more act, and in that fleeting second, I felt the whole room shift. Some furrowed their brows, others tilted their heads, as if recognizing something eerily familiar in my stance. An old veteran in the stands sat up abruptly. The way she stands, I've seen that at Fort Bragg. I drew a slow breath and squeezed the trigger. Bang! The first bullet I fired in the finals hit dead center. Bullseye, not a millimeter off. No sound followed the shot. No applause, no murmurs. Only silence. The kind of silence not born from politeness, but from shock. I saw several people in the stands sit up straighter. A man wearing a veteran's jacket leaned toward his wife. "Did you see her shooting stance?" "Exactly military standard," she whispered back. I didn't smile, didn't nod. Just drew another breath and squeezed the trigger. Bang, the second shot. Also dead center, almost overlapping the first. This time, whispers began to ripple through the room like breaking waves. At the VIP section, Clarissa Malloran gripped her gun tighter. She leaned toward Terry Lockwood, who was sweating like he was under an interrogation. "Lamp, who is she? Yesterday she couldn't even hit the board, and now she's shooting like a machine." Terry could only shake his head. I couldn't hear them, but I could feel the anxiety in the room freeze the air like ice. The third shot. Bang! Once again, bullseye. My hand holding the rifle didn't tremble. It had once held steady in desert, winds blowing at 70 miles per hour with enemies 800 yards away. A few spectators clapping somewhere behind me didn't even register. After the fourth shot, the hall began to buzz uncontrollably. An elderly man shot up from his seat, shouting, "That's military technique, I know it! I saw it in Kandahar." Clarissa stood abruptly, closing her notebook and pretending to adjust her collar, but I saw her jaw tighten. The fifth, and final, shot of my round cracked out like a declaration of war without words. Bang! The target was reeled back in. All 5 bullets clustered so tightly together that the event staff thought there was a malfunction in the scoring machine. The judges all stood up to manually verify the system. I turned my back and walked back to my place. No bowing, no nodding. I let my skills speak louder than any words ever could. The crowd murmured in awe, though most still had no idea who I was. Only those who had once walked the battlefield began piecing the puzzle together. An hour later, just as the final round was about to begin, a murmur swept through the room like an electric current. "A special guest has arrived." The main doors swung open. 3 men entered, dressed in full military dress uniforms, heavy with medals. Leading them, Major General Carlos Rodriguez, commander of the U.S. Special Operations Command. The entire hall turned. This civilian shooting event had never welcomed a general before. Clarissa nearly froze mid-adjusting her headset. Rodriguez walked straight to the organizers, shook hands with the event director. Then he took the microphone. "I'm not here today to compete. I'm here because I heard that a legend of the U.S. Armed Forces was participating in this tournament, and I simply had to come witness it myself." The crowd's heads turned toward me. Breaths caught mid-air. Rodriguez continued, "She doesn't like fanfare. She doesn't seek applause. But countless officers, operatives, and future generations of soldiers have learned from her. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Colonel Alexandra Duskwood." The entire hall held its breath. My name dropped like a bomb into the midst of their smug gathering. Someone dropped their champagne glass. Clarissa stiffened. Terry Lockwood slowly removed his glasses, staring at me as if trying to confirm that the woman they had mocked yesterday as a shooting disaster was a living legend of the United States military. I stood up, adjusted my badge. At that moment I could feel the atmosphere shift completely. There were no more smirks, no more patronizing glances, only reverence and fear, and I was not done yet because my final shot was still waiting. The hall held its breath after Major General Rodriguez announced my identity. The name Colonel Alexandra Duskwood had barely settled when I stepped forward. Rifle in hand, my stride steady, like a silent march through a crowd staggering under, the weight of a newly shattered illusion. Clarissa stood frozen, her lips stiff with shock. Mayor Granger leaned down, whispering something to his aide. Likely, we're in serious trouble. I didn't need a microphone. I spoke just one sentence, loud enough for those nearest to hear, and it spread through the room like wildfire. I request to change the target for my final shot. The judges exchanged bewildered looks. Ms. Duskwood, one man said, his voice gentle as if addressing a stubborn elder. There's no target on the east wall. We have no approved targets there. I pointed toward the old brick wall where a row of trophy cabinets now stood like a curtain. To most, there's nothing there. But to those who lived at Fort Westwood, we know there's always been a target. They just tried to hide it. Without waiting for further permission, I adjusted my stance, nearly 100 yards away. The wall, old and layered with coats of paint. What lay beneath? Only Thomas, myself, and those who had lived, loved, and fallen there would know. I held my breath, sharpened my focus, aimed at the exact spot etched into my memory from 17 years ago, and squeezed the trigger. Bang! No one spoke. Only the soft crackle of crumbling stone echoed from the wall. A layer of paint peeled away. Then a fragment of old brick, and underneath it, what they had tried to bury revealed itself. Thomas's unit insignia, forged in metal, embedded deep into the brickwork, now exposed under the lights. The crowd gasped. Mayor Granger turned pale as a sheet. A press photographer's camera clicked in a frenzy. Several veterans broke into tears. Clarissa stumbled back a step, nearly losing her balance. I walked toward her, slow and deliberate, dragging every ounce of justice with each step, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You erased my husband's name from the city's records, but you can't erase him from that wall. And you can't erase the truth from the bullet that just struck. The microphone near the VIP section was still live, and at that exact moment, Granger blurted out in panic, thinking he was whispering, "How the hell did she know that was still there? I had it covered up." The entire hall heard every word. With one careless outburst, he confirmed that the authorities had deliberately concealed a protected military relic. No escape left. Major General Rodriguez stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice booming, "I confirm that this wall is part of the Fort Westwood Memorial Site, and I further confirm that destroying or concealing such markers is a violation of federal law under military monument protection statutes." The crowd began standing up, snapping photos, recording videos. The sporting event had turned into a revelation of truth. Clarissa tried to recover. She stepped up to the podium, gripping the microphone. "This is just a misunderstanding. We have always respected the history of this place. If there were any oversights, they were purely technical errors." I didn't let her finish. I stepped up and placed a stack of documents and a USB drive on the podium. Inside are the illegal land transfer files, emails between Clarissa Malloran and Mayor Granger, and proof that they deliberately erased Fort Westwood from city planning records. I paused and turned to Granger. "I know you signed it, and I know what you got in return for that signature." Clarissa's face flushed red, then drained white. "You think you can destroy me with a few useless papers?" she hissed, completely losing her composure. I stepped down, looking at her the same way I had looked at many opponents before, those who believed power could shield them from their sins. "It's not me destroying you, Clarissa. You pulled the trigger yourself. I just let the bullet fly true. At that moment, 3 plainclothes agents entered, flashing FBI badges. One of them spoke firmly. "Clarissa Malloran, Paul Granger, you are hereby ordered to surrender documents and are detained for investigation regarding forgery of public records and concealment of protected monuments." Clarissa broke into sobs, while Granger nearly collapsed into his chair. The crowd parted. Some stood and clapped. A few old soldiers saluted me with a hand to their brow, wordless, but heavier than any thanks. 3 days after my final shot, the Moonridge Elite Club sign was quietly taken down. No fanfare, no ceremony. No photographers showed up. No live streams. Only scattered FBI trucks parked around the once proud glass building. Clarissa Malloran was now in federal holding. Mayor Granger had taken unpaid leave and quietly submitted his resignation a few days later. And me, I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I sat in a plain meeting room at the Veterans Legal Defense Fund, alongside my daughter, Grace, and a small group of veterans. None of us wore uniforms anymore. None of us marched under gunfire. But we all shared a single mission: to restore Fort Westwood. Grace was the first to speak. She stood in the center of the room, holding a stack of documents, flipping through each page. The rezoning of Fort Westwood land violated at least 3 federal statutes, including the Military Heritage Preservation Act regulations regarding the resting grounds of military remains and the 2002 Department of Defense Memorandum on honoring fallen service members. She paused for a moment, then turned to me. Her eyes. A mirror of Thomas's. We don't just have the chance to stop the wrong, we have the opportunity to build something better. I looked around the table. Everyone here had once served the nation. They had seen friends fall, not for profit, but for ideals. And they understood that belated recognition is still better than being forgotten. We began drafting the restoration plans, not just to rebuild the memorial wall, but to create a living space, where values like honor, discipline, and sacrifice could be passed down. 3 weeks later, I received a call from the Pentagon. "Colonel Duskwood," the voice said, deep and formal, "we would like to invite you to serve as an official advisor to the Department of Defense for the restoration of Fort Westwood as a nationally recognized military monument." I stayed silent for a few seconds, then replied, "I will accept the role, but I will not accept titles. I don't need statues or ceremonies. I only need one thing: for the truth to be put back in its rightful place." We started with the wall I had once fired upon. Restoration experts carefully peeled back layer after layer of paint, stripping away the lies Clarissa and her cohorts had slapped over it. Beneath the faded white, unit insignias, names, and years of sacrifice began to re-emerge. Some people wept. Some stood rigidly, saluting in silence, as if hearing fallen comrades call their names again. And me, I said nothing. I simply placed my hand on Thomas's insignia and closed my eyes. 1 month later, Fort Westwood was officially reinstated as a national military monument. Alongside Grace and our legal team, we moved step by step, restoring the memorial grounds, establishing a veteran skills training center, creating scholarships for the children of service members, launching educational programs so local students could learn about the true history beneath their feet. One afternoon, while we were repainting the eastern fence, Richard Thornton, former CEO of Moonridge Elite, approached quietly. He wasn't wearing a suit, no silver watch, just a plain shirt carrying a bucket of water. "I lost my way for a long time," he said, "but if you need someone to manage records, HR, or just clean up, I'm willing." I looked at him. Not with forgiveness, but with the understanding that everyone can choose to make amends, if they have the courage to face what they've done. News about Clarissa spread across every headline. No longer the business world's beauty queen or brilliant chairwoman. Instead, Clarissa Malloran under federal investigation for 12 counts of fraud and destruction of protected monuments. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need her suffering to feel at peace, because the real price she paid was greater than any prison sentence. It was having her mask of power ripped away, forced to face the truth she had trampled. I ended one day by visiting the memorial grounds. Evening fell. The breeze whispered softly. I stood before Thomas's plaque, engraved with his name, his unit, and a line. He gave his tomorrow for our today. I placed my hand over that line and whispered, "Rest easy, Thomas." I didn't. Let them forget you, and I won't let them take any part of you away again. 6 months later. The sky was crystal clear, the sunlight sparkling across the new rows of white stones lining the restored Fort Westwood Memorial. Today, there was no grand party. No red carpets, no fancy speeches. Only simple rows of chairs set, neatly, surrounded by American flags fluttering in the breeze. Only people, flesh and blood, who had once worn uniforms, who had once sweat and bled on faraway battlefields, now sitting quietly, witnessing a promise fulfilled. I stood behind the podium, wearing a full-dress uniform for the first time, in nearly a decade. The ribbons and medals across my chest had lost their initial shine, dulled by the march of time. But today, I didn't wear them for myself. I wore them for those who could no longer stand here, wearing the uniform themselves. I looked out across the crowd. In the front row, Grace sat beside Major General Rodriguez. Richard Thornton, once silently complicit beside Clarissa, was now handing out visitor guides to guests. And farther back, beneath the shade of an old oak tree, sat the silver-haired veterans, their jackets stitched with worn unit patches, their eyes following me steadily. I drew a deep breath and began to speak. 20 years ago, my husband, Major Thomas Duskwood, stood on this very ground with me and his comrades. We believed then that their sacrifices would be remembered forever. But time passed, memories faded, promises were forgotten, until a group of people thought they could build walls of money to bury truths built on blood. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the memorial. The new plaques gleamed under the sun, each bearing a name, a life, a story. They were wrong, because there are things money cannot buy. There are oaths that cannot be sold, and there are memories that cannot be erased. After the speech, an honor guard raised the flag. As the American flag reached the top of the pole, everyone stood. Many saluted. Some placed their hands over their hearts. The bugler plays taps, the mournful notes drifting across the open field, cutting deep into every heart present. I clasped my hands behind my back, holding my stance steady. In that moment I saw Thomas, smiling, as if standing just on the other side of that wall, hand raised in salute. That day, Fort Westwood wasn't just restored. It was reborn. The memorial expanded with a free training center for veterans and their children, teaching marksmanship and survival skills. A small museum chronicling Fort Westwood's history and its quiet heroism. A scholarship fund in Thomas Duskwood's name for students in law, military service, and public service. Grace managed the legal operations. Richard oversaw administration. And I took on the task of training the next generation in marksmanship, not to create more warriors, but to plant seeds of respect for the weapon, for the law, and for values that never grow old. Clarissa Malloran, sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for forging public records and desecrating a military monument. The media called it the greatest downfall of a city elite in 50 years. Mayor Granger, expelled from his party, stripped of all titles, now working as a facilities manager at a small rural school. a job that required no business cards or government vehicles. Wasn't happy about their fall. I was happy because justice had been served. A justice not built on revenge, but on restoration. That evening I stood alone before Thomas's plaque. I pulled a small coin from my pocket, the coin he had carried in his shirt on his final mission. I placed it atop his headstone, and whispered, "We kept our promise, Thomas. No one forget, and no one ever will." The wind blew gently. I lifted my head, looking at the unit emblems and silver badges glinting in the setting sun. Through all the loss, through all the scars, through patience, candor, and unyielding faith, we had proven one thing. Sometimes the greatest victory doesn't come from defeating an enemy. It comes from rebuilding what they tried to destroy. They once thought I was just an old woman, out of place in their glittering world. They thought a few coats of paint could bury history. That money could smother blood oaths made long ago. But they forgot one thing. There are bullets that do not aim for flesh. They aim for memory, for truth, for the things that, no matter how many years pass, still shoot straight through every lie. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need applause. I only needed to stand tall, under the sky, at the heart of Fort Westwood reborn, and know we kept the promise, because honor, once carved into stone, can never be erased.